Have you ever looked at someone and wondered what it is about them? I have. I've seen people where doors just seem to swing open. And I've also seen what it feels like to be the one pushing against the wall. You watch them glide through life, and it almost feels like the universe parts the Red Sea just for them. But I tell you something I learned the hard way. That's not luck, it's not coincidence. And it's certainly not something you can manipulate or steal. It's favor. God's unearned supernatural favor. I know the difference between a manipulated situation and a God ordained one because for 12 years I lived on the other side of that line, trying to force doors open with keys I had no business holding. For over a decade, I believed I could command my own destiny. I learned the names of spirits, the power of incantations, and the illusion of control. I thought if I performed the right rituals at the right time, I could pull the strings of my life. But there's something that path never taught me. You can't fake peace, and you can't manufacture favor. You can't manufacture favor. You can manipulate circumstances for a while, but you live in constant fear of it all unraveling. The favor I see now, walking with Jesus, is different. It's not a spell I cast, it's an inheritance I receive. Every single morning, God hands me a blank canvas of mercy and possibility. And I've learned that how I begin my day determines what I paint on it. Some people wake up and immediately grab their phone, inviting the world's chaos into their spirit before they have even had a sip of water. They start complaining, rushing, scrolling through other people's highlight reels while ignoring the director of their own story. Then they wonder why the day feels like a fight. But when I give God my first thought, my first word, my first moment, I'm not just doing something good. I'm positioning myself under an open heaven. I'm stepping into a rhythm where my steps are ordered not by my own frantic energy, but by His divine plan. Let me ask you something. Honestly, what is the very first thing your mind grabs onto when you wake up? Is it fear, your to do list, or is it Him? I remember an elder in my former community, a woman deeply entrenched in the occult, known for her power. People traveled miles to see her, but I watched her one morning before a big ritual. She was restless, agitated, chain smoking, trying to get into the spirit. They, her power was something she had to chase, to work up to bleed for. Years later, after I gave my life to Christ, I met a different kind of woman. She was a simple prayer warrior at my church, not famous, not wealthy, but when she walked into a room, a real peace settled. I asked her one morning what her secret was. She smiled and said, Nia, I don't step out of my door until I know heaven has walked before me. I can't afford to. Every morning before sunrise, she was there, Bible open, quietly speaking to Jesus. She wasn't manipulating anything, she was surrendering. Her life reflected it. Her business thrived, her family was whole, and even in trials, she carried a strength I never had before. Her favor wasn't random, it came from alignment. In Matthew 6:33, It's laid out simply: seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Not some, everything. When I put God first, I give him permission to bring order to my chaos. I invite his wisdom into my decisions and his peace into my emotions. I used to start my days in panic, trying to control every outcome. It was exhausting. Everything felt like a battle. But on the mornings when I make myself slow down, sit still, and just thank Yeshua, the whole day moves differently. The challenges don't disappear, but I don't fall apart under them. That's not coincidence. That's a different rhythm. Think about your own life. Can you remember a day you started with him versus one you rushed into? You can feel the difference. Here's something most people don't realize: the morning is a spiritual gateway. It's when heaven opens its hands with fresh mercy. Lamentations 3:22-23 reminds us that his mercies are new every morning. Every sunrise carries a fresh measure of favor, but I have learned you have to show up to receive it. You have to be present. When I wake up and acknowledge him, I am not just saying a prayer, I'm partnering with the Creator. I'm stepping into an agreement for the day ahead. I like to think of life like a garden. Every morning, God places seeds of mercy, peace, and favor in my hands. What I do in those first moments determines whether they grow or fade. If I plant them in gratitude and faith, they grow. If I plant them in worry or distraction, they don't. David understood this. In Psalm 63, 1, he said, "Early will I seek thee." A king with everything to manage still knew his strength came from that early connection. Favor meets those who rise to meet the king. I've heard people say they don't have time for prayer, but the truth is, you don't have time not to. When you step into the day uncovered, you're walking into a battlefield unprepared. The way you start your morning shapes the rhythm of your life. And I've come to see that clearly. The first thing I do each morning now is simple: I seek Him first. There's a principle behind that. In the Old Testament, the firstborn received the double portion. The first of everything belonged to God. Your morning is the first of your day. If you give those first moments to the world gets the best of your energy. But if you give them to God, He takes responsibility for the whole day. I remember when I first came out of witchcraft, I was used to doing everything in my own strength, always trying to control outcomes. I'd wake up already thinking, already fighting battles in my mind. One morning, after a particularly draining week, I heard a quiet thought: peace doesn't come from effort, it comes from presence. From that day on, I made a decision. No matter how busy I was, God would get my first moments. The change was clear. Panic gave way to peace. Confusion turned into clarity. Things that used to take hours of struggle started to flow more naturally. When I put Him first, favor started to find me more easily. Psalm 5, 3 says, "In the morning will I direct my prayer unto thee, and will look up." I like that look up. not around. So let me ask you again. When you wake up, what do you look at first? Your phone? Or do you take a moment to look up with gratitude? Because favor follows focus. Daniel is another example I think about often. He prayed 3 times a day consistently, no matter what, even when it wasn't allowed. And because of that, kings respected his wisdom, and even lions couldn't harm him. That kind of favor didn't come by chance, it came from consistency. When I make God my first audience every morning, He places me in a position to represent Him everywhere else. Those first minutes after waking up, they matter more than most people realize. They shape the atmosphere of the entire day. I've learned not to waste them. When I wake up now, I don't rush to speak. I try to listen first. I let gratitude come before my feet even touch the ground. A simple prayer: Lord, thank you for this day. Guide my steps. Fill me with peace. It's not long, but it's sincere. And that sincerity matters more than length. I've noticed something over time. When I start my day that way, things begin to align. Problems that might have frustrated me get resolved more easily. Doors open that I didn't expect. That's not random. That's what happens when priorities are in order. Favor responds to order, and order begins with putting God first. Think of it like a compass. If it's set wrong in the morning, you spend the whole day off course. But if it's set correctly early, everything else lines up. Proverbs 3 6 says, in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. So I try to remember before I rush into anything, I pause. I don't reach for my phone first. I reach for his presence. I don't start with complaints. I start with connection because I've seen it too many times. When I seek Him first, favor starts moving in my direction. Now, there's a second piece to this that I found just as important. After seeking God, I've learned I need to speak what I want to see. If every morning carries a kind of power, and my words guide where that power goes. I've noticed something simple but important. If I wake up saying I'm tired, that feeling tends to follow me. If I say this will be a hard day, it often turns out that way. But if I begin by saying God is with me, His favor surrounds me, this day will work for my good, something shifts. My thinking changes. My energy changes. And often the day follows that direction. Proverbs 18:21 says, life and death are in the power of the tongue. That's not just a saying. Words are like seeds. Every morning, what I say starts to grow into the kind of day I'll have. If I speak faith, I plant favor. If I speak fear, I plant frustration. It's that straightforward. Even in the beginning, in Genesis, God didn't just think things into existence, He spoke them. Words create direction. I've come to see my mornings as a kind of microphone. What I say into it matters. And I learned that lesson personally. When I first left witchcraft, I carried a lot of shame. Every morning, negative thoughts would come. telling me I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't change. For a while, I agreed with those thoughts, and my life reflected that agreement. But then I came across Romans 4:17, which speaks about calling things that are not as though they were. That changed how I approached my mornings. Differently. I began to speak differently. I started saying, I am made new. God's favor surrounds me. And slowly, things began to change. My thinking started to shift. My confidence grew. Opportunities began to appear that I hadn't even imagined before. It wasn't just a change in thought, it was a change in thought. It was a change in what I consistently said. Psalm 5:12 says that God surrounds the righteous with favor like a shield. That means favor isn't something that shows up once in a while. It can be something that stays with you daily. But I have learned that I have to speak in alignment with that. When I declare favor in the morning, I'm not pretending everything is perfect. I'm choosing to align myself with what God has already promised. And that matters because every morning there are other voices, doubt, fear, uncertainty, trying to take the lead. Those thoughts will say things like, you're not enough, or nothing will change. But I've learned I don't have to agree with them. I can answer back with truth. I can say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can say, goodness and mercy will follow me. I can say, no weapon formed against me shall prosper. The moment I do that, something shifts. Authority moves away from fear and toward faith. Silence isn't always helpful. Sometimes, if I don't say what's true, something else will fill that space. So each morning, I try to take responsibility for the atmosphere I step into. I've developed a simple habit. When I wake up, I say, Father, thank you for this day. I walk in peace. I walk in wisdom. The right doors will open, and what should not stand against me won't. Then I pause and let that settle. It's not just a routine, it's a way of setting direction before the day even begins. I've come to believe that words spoken in faith go ahead of me and help shape what I walk into. There's a moment in Mark 11 where Jesus speaks to a fig tree and later it withers. The disciples were surprised, but he used that to show them something important. Words spoken in faith carry weight. He said, if you speak to a mountain and don't doubt, it can move. That idea stayed with me. It reminded me that it's not enough to think about change. I have to speak toward it. So now, before I face challenges, I try to address them early, not by complaining, but by giving direction. Instead of describing the problem, I speak toward the outcome. I say, this is a good day. I will move through it with clarity. That kind of language matters. It sets the tone. I've come to see words as the key to the atmosphere I live in each day. When I speak in alignment with faith, I give God something to work with. When I speak negatively, I create space for the opposite. So I make a point not to let my first words be about problems. I try to make them about promises. And over time, that habit changes how I move through the day. I don't just react anymore. I lead with intention. There's a third part to this that I think ties everything together. It's not just about prayer or words, it's about action, purposeful action. One of the biggest misunderstandings I've seen is the idea that favor means doing nothing and waiting. I've seen both extremes. People either try to control everything, like I once did, or they sit back and expect everything to happen without effort. But I have learned that favor tends to move alongside action. Prayer opens the door, words set the direction, but action is what actually walks through that door. James 2:17 says that faith without works is dead. That's a simple way of saying belief needs movement. Without it, nothing grows. Favor isn't drawn to wishful thinking, it responds to action taken in faith. So each morning, after I pray and speak, I ask my simple question: what step should I take today? And then I take it. I think about Ruth in the Bible. She could have stayed where she was, but instead she went out into the field. And that's where she found favor. It didn't come to her while she was waiting, it met her while she was moving. That principle is something I've seen play out again and again. When I position myself through action, things begin to connect. Too many people, I think, ask for open doors but never walk toward them. They hope for change but don't take steps in that direction. I've learned that action is a sign of expectation. When I move with intention, I'm showing that I believe something good can happen. I remember a young man I met years ago. He would pray regularly for success in his business. He used all the right words, stayed consistent in prayer, but nothing changed. Back then, I even tried to help him in the wrong ways, thinking I could force an outcome. It didn't work. Later, I saw him again, and things were different. He was doing well. I asked him what changed. He told me something simple. He realized he had been asking for results without putting in the work. He hadn't started what he wanted go, so he made a plan. He took small, steady steps. He stayed consistent, and over time, things began to build. That's when results started to show up. That stuck with me. It reminded me of a principle: what you work on with diligence has a way of growing. Proverbs 12:24 talks about the hand of the diligent leading. There's something about steady effort that attracts progress. I've also noticed that when I give my best to what's in front of me, things tend to expand from there. It's like giving God something to multiply. Just like when Jesus multiplied the loaves and fish, there was something there to begin with. If nothing is offered, there's nothing to grow. That's why I've come to value small, consistent actions. They may not look impressive at first, but they create momentum. So now, when I start my day, I try to align three things: pray, words, and action. If I pray for a productive day, I organize my time. If I speak about opportunity, I follow up with effort. If I believe doors will open, I make sure I'm ready to walk through them. I've learned that planning without prayer can lead to pride, and prayer without planning can lead to frustration. But when the two come together with action, things begin to move in a steady direction. Colossians 3:23 reminds me to do my work wholeheartedly. I try to treat what I do each day as something meaningful, not just routine. That perspective changes how I show up. Purposeful action, to me, is simply trusting enough to move forward, even when I don't see everything clearly yet. And I've seen that when I take that first step, things often begin to open up. There's a moment in Exodus where the people are standing before the Red Sea. Moses calls out, and the response is simple: move forward. And when they did, the path appeared. I think that's how it works sometimes. The step comes first, then the clarity follows. I've seen it in other examples too. David didn't stay back, he moved forward. Peter stepped out of the boat. Esther spoke up when it mattered. Each of those moments involved action before the outcome was certain. That's the pattern I try to follow now. Every morning, I ask myself what one or two steps I can take that align with what I believe. It doesn't have to be something big. Often, it's small things, being consistent, keeping my word, focusing on what needs to be done. Over time, those small actions add up. There's a principle in Luke 16:10 about being faithful in small things. I found that to be true. When I take care of what's in front of me, more responsibility tends to follow naturally. So now, instead of just asking for a good day, I try to participate in building one. I prepare, I act, and I stay consistent. And when I look back, I can see how these pieces connect. And when I look back, I can see how these pieces connect. Seeking God first, speaking with intention, and taking action, they work together. When I stay consistent with those habits, something interesting happens. What once felt like occasional good moments starts to feel more like a pattern. Favor stops feeling random and starts feeling connected to how I live each day. Every morning becomes more than just the start of another day. It feels like an opportunity, a fresh beginning, day, a chance to reset, to realign, and to move forward with clarity. I've noticed that not everyone takes that opportunity. Some people rush straight into the noise of the day, while others take a moment to pause. And over time, that difference shows up in how their days unfold. Psalm 5:3 talks about bringing your thoughts to God in the morning and waiting with expectation. That idea of expectation matters. When I begin the day that way, I am not chasing outcomes. I am allowing things to come together. Favor, in my experience, isn't random. It responds to consistency, it follows alignment. When I give the first part of my day to God, I am making a quiet decision about what matters most. Proverbs 3:6 reminds me that acknowledging God leads to direction. And I've seen that play out in simple ways: better decisions, clearer thinking, steadier emotions. The way I start my morning often reflects what I'm depending on. If I begin in worry, I rely on myself. If I begin with trust, I rely on something greater. Even Jesus took time early in the morning to step away and pray. That tells me something important. The first voice I listen to matters. I've seen the difference between days that feel smooth and days that feel like a struggle. Often, it comes back to how they started. When I take time to center myself early, things tend to flow better, not because everything is easy, but because I'm more grounded. I've also noticed how the right opportunities, conversations, and ideas seem to show up at the right time, not by chance, but because I'm more aware and aligned. So I have made it a habit to begin simply. A quiet moment, a word of thanks, a clear intention. That small start carries through the rest of the day. From there, I try to stay consistent. I speak with intention. I act with purpose. And I trust that over time, those patterns lead somewhere meaningful. I've come to be live. That favor doesn't just appear, it's drawn by relationship and consistency. When I stay connected, things tend to align more naturally. And if there's one thought I carry with me, it's this: every morning is an invitation, an opportunity to start well, to think clearly, and to move forward with purpose. That invitation, the day unfolds differently, not perfectly, but steadily. And over time, that makes all the difference. When I stay consistent with those habits, something interesting happens. What once felt like occasional good moments starts to feel more like a pattern. Favor stops feeling random and starts feeling connected to how I live each day. Every morning becomes more than just the start of another day. It feels like an opportunity, a fresh beginning, a chance to reset, to realign, and to move forward with clarity. I've noticed that not everyone takes that opportunity. Some people rush straight into the noise of the day, while others take a moment to pause. And over time, that difference shows up in how their days unfold. Psalm 5:3 talks about bringing your thoughts to God in the morning and waiting with expectation. That idea of expectation matters. When I begin the day that way, I'm not chasing outcomes. I'm allowing things to come together. Favor, in my experience, isn't random. It responds to consistency. It follows alignment. When I give the first part of my day to God, I'm making a quiet decision about what matters most. Proverbs 3:6 reminds me that acknowledging God leads to direction. And I've seen that play out in simple ways: better decisions, clearer thinking, steadier emotions. The way I start my morning often reflects what I'm depending on. If I begin in worry, I rely on myself. If I begin with trust, I rely on something greater. Even Jesus took time early in the morning to step away and pray. Tenth, the first voice I listen to matters. I've seen the difference between days that feel smooth and days that feel like a struggle. Often it comes back to how they started. When I take time to center myself early, things tend to flow better, not because everything is easy, but because I'm more grounded. I've also noticed how the right opportunities, conversations, and ideas seem to show up at the right time. Not by chance, but because I'm more aware and aligned there. So I've made it a habit to begin simply, a quiet moment, a word of thanks, a clear intention. That small start carries through the rest of the day. From there, I try to stay consistent. I speak with intention. I act with purpose. And I trust that over time, those patterns lead somewhere meaningful. I've come to believe that favor doesn't just appear, it's drawn by relationship and consistency. When I stay connected, things tend to align more naturally. And if there's one thought I carry with me, it's this: every morning is an invitation, an opportunity to start well, to think clearly, and to move forward with purpose. When I accept that invitation, the day unfolds differently. Not perfectly, but steadily. And over time, that makes all the difference.